You have heard it 10,000 times, and you will hear it in your head right now without me even having to describe it. That soft little sigh when you press the lid down and the air slips out, that tiny breath of plastic and whatever was left inside from last time. You have one in your kitchen drawer right now. It is probably avocado green, or maybe that dusty orange, or maybe that cloudy see-through color that looked like frosted glass. It is older than your children. It might be older than your marriage. And if you open it and hold it up to your nose, you will smell something you cannot name, but your whole body recognizes. That is Tupperware. 90% of American homes had at least one piece of it. The company that made it went bankrupt in September 2024. The brand name sold for $23 million. That is less than a single house in most neighborhoods in Manhattan. But the container in your drawer is still there. It will outlast everything. Before we dive in, let me know in the comments where you are watching from. If your mother had Tupperware, and she did, you remember it in the refrigerator before you remember it anywhere else. The leftovers from Sunday dinner, sealed up in the big bowl with the lid that burped when she pressed it shut, felt like magic. And when you were 5, you thought that burp was the funniest sound in the world. The smaller containers lined up on the second shelf like soldiers, each one holding something from a different night that week. The meatloaf from Tuesday, next to the rice from Thursday, next to something green that nobody was ever going to eat, but she saved it anyway because wasting food was not something her generation did. You remember the way the lids never quite matched the bottoms after a while? You remember the kitchen drawer where the lids lived in a tangled pile, and finding the right one was like solving a puzzle that got harder every year. Because somehow the lids multiplied but the bowls disappeared, and nobody could explain how that was possible. Yet every family in America experienced the same phenomenon. And you remember the rule. The unspoken, unwritten, ironclad rule that every household in America obeyed without anyone ever putting it into words. If someone gave you food in a Tupperware container, you gave that container back. That was not optional. That was not negotiable. That was a contract, as binding as anything ever signed in a courtroom. You returned it clean, and you returned it promptly, and if you did not, if you forgot, if you lost it, if you threw it away by accident, that relationship was never quite the same again. People held grudges over Tupperware. Real grudges, the kind that lasted through Thanksgivings and Christmases and family reunions. Your mother knew exactly which containers were hers and which ones belonged to Linda next door, and if Linda still had the large rectangular one from the casserole she brought over in November, your mother was keeping count, and she was not going to let it go. That container lasted forever. That was the thing about it. The plastic was not like any other plastic. It did not crack. It did not stain, or at least not in a way that made you throw it away. It did not warp in the dishwasher. You could drop it from the counter and it bounced. Children stacked them and stood on them and used them as drums and bathtubs for dolls and the lids as frisbees in the backyard. None of it mattered because the stuff was indestructible. Families passed it down. That is not an exaggeration. There are people alive today who have Tupperware in their kitchen that their grandmother bought in 1962. Their grandmother is gone, and the house is gone, and the neighborhood has changed, but the Tupperware bowl is still in the cabinet, and it still seals, and the lid still sighs when you press it. That sound is the only thing left of Sunday afternoons that smelled like pot roast and sounded like a football game coming from the other room. The man who invented it was a farm boy from New Hampshire who wanted to be a millionaire by the time he was 30. Earl Tupper grew up poor. His father tinkered with machines on the family farm, and his mother took in laundry to make ends meet. Earl was selling the family produce door to door by the time he was 10 years old, and even then he understood something that most people never figure out. He understood that if you bring the product to the customer instead of waiting for the customer to come to you, you sell more of it. He carried that lesson his whole life. He studied at Bryant College, tried his hand at landscaping and tree surgery, went bankrupt during the Depression, and then in 1937, he walked into a plastics factory in Leominster, Massachusetts, owned by DuPont, and everything changed. He worked there for 1 year. That was all he needed. He later said that year was where his education really began. He learned how to mold plastic, how to refine it, how to shape it into things that people could use. He left DuPont and started his own company out of a converted garage with a few used injection molding machines and a notebook full of ideas he could not stop scribbling. During the war, he made parts for gas masks and signal lamps for the Navy. After the war, he took a block of polyethylene slag, a black, stinking waste product from the oil refining process, and he turned it into something no one had ever seen before. A plastic that was clear instead of black, flexible instead of brittle, odorless instead of foul. He called it Poly-T. And then he designed a lid for it that sealed airtight, modeled on the top of a paint can, and when he put those two things together, he had the most useful kitchen product in America. He just could not get anyone to buy it. In retail stores, Business Week later wrote, it fell flat on its face. People did not trust plastic anywhere near their food. The seal confused them. They would buy the containers, try to close them, fail, and return them to the store saying the lids did not fit. Earl Tupper had built something revolutionary, and America wanted nothing to do with it. And then a woman in Detroit changed everything. Brownie Wise did not come from money. She did not come from business. She came from a broken home in Georgia, where her father left when she was 2 years old, and her mother traveled for months at a time organizing union workers. Brownie was raised mostly by her Aunt Pearl, a dressmaker who lived outside Atlanta. She dropped out of school as a teenager. By 14, she was giving speeches at union rallies on her mother's behalf. She married young and had a son named Jerry. When her husband turned out to be a drinker and the marriage fell apart, she found herself exactly where millions of women in the 1940s found themselves, alone with a child and no diploma and no money, with no choice but to figure it out. She started selling cleaning products for a company called Stanley Home Products. She was good at it. At Stanley, she discovered something that would change the way things were sold in America forever. She discovered that women bought more when they were together, not in a store, not from a catalog, but in a living room, surrounded by their friends, with someone they trusted showing them how a product worked. That was the secret. And when she found Tupperware, she knew immediately that it was the perfect product for that setting. A product that needed to be demonstrated, a product that needed to be held and squeezed and sealed and burped and even thrown across the room to prove it would not leak. She started her own small company called Patio Parties and sold Tupperware at home demonstrations with her mother helping her. By October of 1949, she had recruited 19 dealers, and her little team had sold over $150,000 worth of Tupperware. That was more than any store in America had moved in an entire year. Earl Tupper heard about her. He demanded to know her secret. She told him the party. He hired her as vice president of marketing in 1951. And on her suggestion, he pulled his product from every retail shelf in the country and committed entirely to the home party model. It was the most important decision in the history of the company, and it was her idea. What Brownie Wise built in the next 7 years was something that had never existed before. A nationwide network of 20,000 dealers, distributors, and managers, most of them women, many of them housewives who had never earned a dollar of their own money, some of them African American women in a decade when almost no doors were open to them. She built the annual Homecoming Jubilee in Kissimmee, Florida, a multi-day celebration that was part family reunion and part revival meeting, where the top sellers dug prizes out of the ground that had been buried in Tupperware containers the night before, and where women who had spent their lives being told their place was in the kitchen were given diamond rings and mink coats and Cadillacs for being the best salespeople in the country. In a culture that rarely applauded the efforts of working-class women, the Tupperware ladies were showered with praise and prizes. What else in their lives offered that? Brownie Wise understood that she was not selling plastic. She was selling possibility. Her philosophy was 5 words long, and it was the most important sentence anyone at that company ever said. If we build the people, they will build the business. By 1954, Tupperware was doing $25 million a year in sales. Brownie Wise became the first woman ever to appear on the cover of Business Week. People knew her by her first name the way people today know Oprah. She lived in a lakeside mansion in Florida filled with contemporary art and rattan furniture and flamingo pink upholstery that a journalist described as looking more like the lobby of a swank beach hotel than a house. She had the people skills of Dale Carnegie, the looks of Doris Day, and the magnetism of Eva Peron. Earl Tupper, the quiet man in New England who despised crowds and never once attended the Jubilee he funded, was watching her get all the credit for the empire he believed he had invented, and he was getting jealous. In 1957, Brownie published her autobiography. It was called Best Wishes, Brownie Wise. That was the last straw. Tupper decided to sell the company, and he believed it would be easier to sell without an outspoken woman at the top of the sales operation. In January 1958, the board of directors fired her. No warning, no negotiation. She owned no stock in the company. The house she lived in was company property. She filed a lawsuit for $1.6 million. She settled for $30,000, 1 year's salary. That was it. That was what the woman who built the most successful direct sales operation in American history walked away with. $30,000 and nothing else. And then Earl Tupper did something that still makes people's blood boil when they hear it. He took the remaining copies of her autobiography and buried them in a pit near the Tupperware headquarters in Florida. He removed every mention of her name from company records and promotional materials. He erased her. Then he sold the company to Rexall Drug for $16 million, divorced his wife, renounced his American citizenship, and moved to Costa Rica. He died there in 1983. Brownie Wise tried to start over. She launched a cosmetics company called Cinderella International that used the same party plan model. It failed within a year. She tried 2 more companies, none of them worked. She spent her later years doing real estate, making art from clay and textiles, and attending church in Kissimmee, Florida, the same town where she had once been carried on the shoulders of thousands of women who called her by name. She died on September 24, 1992, at the age of 79 in near total obscurity. Most of the people selling Tupperware at the time of her death had never heard of her. The company she built kept going for another 66 years after she was erased, and in those 66 years, it made almost every wrong decision it was possible to make. When Brownie Wise pulled Tupperware out of stores in 1951, it made sense. The product needed demonstration, but the company never put it back. For 71 years, the only way to buy Tupperware was at a party or through a consultant. In the 1990s, the company had an official policy forbidding its own salespeople from selling online. They said that in-person demonstrations were far more valuable than anything they could do over the internet. When disposable containers from Glad and Ziploc started eating their market in the late 1990s, the CEO was asked if Tupperware would make a disposable version. He held up a cheap pen and said, "I will lose 2 or 3 of these a week, but my better pens, I always know where they are." That was his answer. That was the entire strategy. The world changed, and Tupperware refused to change with it. They did not start selling in Target until 2022. They did not list on Amazon until 2022. By then, the word Tupperware had become so generic that when people searched for it online, the results were filled with products made by other companies. The name that once meant everything now meant nothing, because anyone could use it and everyone did. In September of 2024, Tupperware Brands Corporation filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy, $1.2 billion in debt, $679 million in assets. The brand that had once been in 9 out of 10 American homes, that had employed hundreds of thousands of women, that had been sold in 100 countries, was sold 2 months later to a group of lenders for $23.5 million in cash. A brand that at its peak generated over $2 billion a year, sold for the price of a modest office building. Somewhere in your kitchen right now, there is a container that has been there longer than most of the appliances on your counter. The lid still works, it still sighs when you press it down. The color has faded a little, but the seal holds the same way it held the night your mother packed leftover turkey into it, the November after Kennedy, and the November after that, and the November after that, for 40 years of Novembers, each one sealed shut with that same small breath of air. The company that made it is gone. The man who invented it left the country with $16 million and never looked back. The woman who made it matter, who gave it a name and a purpose and a place in every living room in America, was fired and erased and buried along with her book in a hole in the Florida dirt. But the container is still here. It was built to last, and it did. And if you hold it up to the light, you can see through it the same way you could the day it came home in that little bag from that party your mother went to on a Tuesday night in 1961 when she told your father she would be back by 9, but she didn't get home until 10:30 because she was laughing so hard with the women from down the street that she lost track of time and bought 2 bowls she did not need but never regretted because they are still in the cabinet 60 years later, and they are the only thing from that kitchen that survived. Her name is not on them, but they were always hers. If you still have Tupperware that is older than your children, tell me about it. If your mother went to the parties, tell me what she brought home. If there is a container in your kitchen right now that you cannot bring yourself to throw away, even though you have no idea where the LID is, tell me about that too. I read every single one.